our 6th episode of Season 3, we're going to be talking, Martin, all about the art of setting boundaries.
Saying no and mastering that all-important balance between
giving your all and protecting your peace.
Protecting your peace. Wow. Sounds like something really interesting.
And I think some people think that setting boundaries is selfish or you're in some way putting a barrier up to other people. But in fact, it's a lot more resourceful than that.
It's all about honouring your self-worth.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, when you don't feel that great. You might at the time because you allow someone to creep into your boundary because there's a temporary feel-good factor.
Yeah.
But how does it feel later?
Frustrating.
Annoying. Irritating.
And it is something that many people don't actually consciously think about. They just feel the consequences of somebody having crossed a boundary because quite often they haven't been aware of it or communicated it to the other person.
Well, I guess we're allowing people to cross the boundaries. You know, we're allowing people to do it. And out of politeness, out of being kind to that person in that moment, we've allowed someone to cross that boundary. But the problem is when it doesn't align with your own values, at some later point, you are not going to feel good. And you do that over a period of time consistently, be it in a personal relationship, be it in a professional relationship. If you keep allowing someone to cross that boundary, you're not doing yourself a service, nor the other person.
No, and you'll end up just getting frustrated. It can affect your relationships and, you know, you have a lifetime of putting others first, which is not resourceful for anybody concerned. So
how are we going to help people with this?
We will explore what boundaries are in this context and the sources and symptoms of people that maybe overcommit and don't share their boundaries.
Your values underpin your own boundaries, perhaps.
And importantly, how to identify and communicate your boundaries resourcefully in a conversation with other people.
Critical.
Yeah.
And not easy to do.
No, absolutely not. Takes a lot of courage.
And do it without feeling guilty or awkward. And that is the real secret, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
You know, is being
absolutely.
honouring your values and actually being clear about them to people. Although it might feel difficult at the time, later on, you've got a much healthier relationship.
And it's like anything, you know, it feels a bit awkward at first, but over time it gets easier and easier, especially when you see the positive benefits for yourself and for your relationship with other people.
Those are the things we're going to explore in this podcast. I really believe you're going to get some very useful things from it, some pretty practical things, as always. We're not just talking about the theory. We want to give you some practical ways to be able to manage your boundaries with yourself and other people. So let's start off with, what do you mean by, what actually is a boundary?
Essentially, what a boundary is a statement of what behaviours are acceptable or unacceptable.
To an individual. What effective boundaries do is they promote healthy relationships. So there's not, there's a sense of clarity in terms of what's important to you and to I and what behaviours are acceptable or not. So it's really healthy in building relationships, but also in a sense of self-autonomy and self-care. You know, if you're going through life and you're constantly putting the needs of others or the demands of others ahead of yourself, then as we expressed earlier, you know, over time, you're going to deplete your own reserves and get frustrated and not be the best version of yourself. What would be some examples of the sort of things we're talking about here in terms of types of boundaries?
I think the thing to say about boundaries as well is we're not learning them for the first time. Say when you're a baby, for example, and a baby is passed to a stranger, a baby very quickly signifies that a boundary has been crossed. So we come with our own boundaries and a sense of what we like and what we don't like. You know, if you a child and you give them certain foods, they'll soon tell you if they don't like them. You know, if you take their toy, they will soon tell you that you've crossed a boundary. You know, there's lots of examples of where children actually are very good at expressing their boundaries. But over time and through our experiences and
unfiltered
through our... Absolutely.
feedback. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Brutal sometimes.
Yes, indeed.
Actually, teenagers are a bit like that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But more on that later. But I think over time, through your experiences and your relationships and your upbringing, there's a desensitization that happens over time that can result in you putting the needs of others because of your need for that sense of belonging and to be liked by other people. There is a tendency to start desensitizing and putting the needs of other people first, which leads very quickly to unclear boundaries and lots of crossing boundaries happening.
If
all over
only
the
we
place.
could have that childlike quality, right?
Yeah.
And that unfiltered, I don't like this, and tell them straight away and immediately.
I mean, maybe not quite how a child does. That would make for interesting meetings.
We would be saving ourselves a lot of pain and anguish later on, because as you say, we know what they are, but we don't communicate them, and therefore that starts to create issues and problems.
Absolutely.
And we're frustrated with ourselves as well, because you want to say something but you don't. And actually, you know, when you think about friends or work colleagues and they're telling you about somebody that somebody's annoying them or somebody has annoyed them because they've done something, there's a violation of one of your boundaries. And you say to them, well, have you spoken to them about it? Oh, no, I felt uncomfortable about doing that.
Yeah.
Yet they're coming to you complaining about it. So they're not feeling very happy about it. How would that person really feel if they knew you were talking about them?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
well, that might be a boundary of theirs that you are crossing.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the reasons why people have an issue with setting boundaries is they have a real issue with saying no to somebody. And there's like, I mean, I've done it a billion times. You say yes when you mean no. You know, particularly people like me, people pleasers or recovering people pleasers, you find it really difficult to say no. So you'll just hear yourself saying yes when everything in your physiology and your brain is screaming to you, say no, but you can't. Yes comes out of your mouth.
So if somebody was doing this, they might say, I respect your point of view. I can't say that I wholeheartedly agree with that, and then talk about it.
Yes.
That would be you doing it in the moment, rather than... Have you noticed how people in conversations, when they're in a group, everybody is just agreeing with each other?
Artificial harmony, I think.
Artificial harmony, indeed. Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. And you're thinking, well, is everybody unanimously agreeing with each other? Or are people just going along?
Because they don't want to have the confrontation associated with disagreeing.
Yeah.
So that's an example of a mental boundary. So about thoughts and feelings and the willingness to express your own opinion. Another example is a time boundary. So, you know, I can attend the meeting for 30 minutes rather than being in a meeting 4 hours later and thinking about the increasing workload you've got piling up back at your desk. Or, you know, visiting a relative. You know, it may be that you've got so much on your plate and that is just one more thing that you need to do. If you can feel confident in expressing a boundary around it, say, I'll come and see you on Thursday, and, you know, if it's okay, I'll be with you for an hour, and then I really need to go and pick up.
That's a good point, though, isn't it? Because then you can show up with all of yourself.
Yeah.
Rather than with part of yourself, because you can sense that the person's arrived, but they're actually not really fully there.
Yeah, and they're constantly looking at their phone or looking out the window or just looking and feeling.
Yeah.
The environment feels a little bit stressed, doesn't it, when someone's doing that? There could be things like material boundaries. So, for example, you've lent a book or some money to somebody and, you know, maybe they haven't quite returned it in a way that you had set out.
Never loan a book. It's one of my...
Martin, actually, you might even be able to see the library behind me. Martin's very precious about
his well, the thing is, look, just an aside.
It's a boundary.
If you loan a book, don't ever expect to get it back.
No.
Even if the person intends to give it back to you, they won't give it back to you.
Have you got like a library system with it?
Well, I can tell you this. The one time I did actually loan a book, I wrote a piece of paper and put it back in the bookcase, telling me who I'd loaned the book to.
Good idea. Who was it?
And I never got it back.
Are you going to name any names?
I won't name any names. I won't shame anybody. I've just learned my lesson that it's better to actually buy them the book on Amazon there and then.
That's a good signal that a boundary has been crossed.
Yeah. Another boundary might be around what people are comfortable talking about and what they're not so comfortable talking about. I do feel that this is sometimes it can be a cultural thing. For example, I was in, as you know, in Seoul recently, and we had 8 Japanese participants on that program, and there is a very different culture in terms of what you will openly talk about in a comfortable way, particularly if you're talking about feedback. And there's a very strong social structure there around what is appropriate and not appropriate to do, calling people out. In the West, more comfortable. In the East, or certainly in Japan, less so.
Absolutely.
And you've got to respect that. You've got to respect that. So, we can enforce you should be more open. You should be open. You should want the feedback. You should be more receptive to it. Well, if you're in a culture where that is deemed to be rude or unacceptable or actually makes everybody uncomfortable, we have to respect that.
Yeah.
In personal relationships, I remember a book that John Cleese wrote, I think it was with Robin Skinner, called Families. And I remember one particular idea in there. The therapist presented this idea of the curtain, and how he described it was that there are certain things that, behind the curtain we don't talk about. And what you'll tend to do is you'll either attract or repel partners that feel comfortable talking about, or if you're with somebody and you're meeting someone in the early part of a relationship and you feel they're talking about things you feel very uncomfortable with, in those early stages you will start to feel, I'm not sure I feel comfortable around this person. They're going too far too soon, talking about things that just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it's a feeling, isn't it?
Whereas, so there's certain things behind the curtain we just shut away, we don't feel comfortable talking about. And of course, if that's your boundary and if it's someone else's, you feel comfortable, you feel safe with them.
Yeah.
And therefore the relationship will continue on.
There's 2 things to what you've just said. I mean, first, really important is the cultural awareness and having an awareness of what some cultural boundaries might be.
And being respectful to it.
And being respectful, both in terms of, all sorts of different boundaries, but, time. In certain parts of Europe, they have completely different attitudes to time than
timeliness, tardiness.
Timeliness, being on time to meetings, how long you take for lunch, what's acceptable in terms of demands in a training room when they're going to come back. Definitely physical boundaries in certain cultures. You can't just go up and hug somebody and expect that to build a relationship.
Reciprocated,
exactly. And obviously you mentioned things that people feel comfortable talking about. I mean, there is actually an example. I think Joe Biden, there's a good example with him where he used to be he would just go up and start sort of hugging people and touching people's hair, and it was all actually the time of that Me Too campaign, and he got some pretty serious feedback. I haven't really seen much of him now to see whether he's actually made a change, but he certainly put out a statement that he hadn't been aware of his tendency to do that and made a commitment to modify his behaviour. But even at the very highest level, you would think somebody like that would have understood the number of different cultures that he's met, but he would just go in for the full-on hug.
Well, I remember
time.
We were doing a personality or behavioural style topic once, and I was asking them, what do they like about other people? What do they like less about other people? And this person was sort of, I would describe as more reserved. And in their style, more analytical thinker, deeper thinker, more introverted. She wrote on the flip chart, "Don't get too close or hug me."
Yeah.
And I asked her about that, and she said it's amazing how people just feel they can invade your space.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking for additional friends. I might hug my friends, but I don't hug work colleagues.
But actually, even some people, I mean, I am a bit of a hugger.
You are indeed.
Yeah. And sometimes when you hug people, you can feel the boundary, can't you? because it's very
too late. You've
rigid.
already crossed it. Yeah.
Sorry to anyone that I have randomly hugged that hated it. And another example of what you were talking about in terms of conversational boundaries, we have it at our dinner table all the time, particularly with teenage girls when you get onto the subject of anything to do with sex or anything like that. It is very clear that you know what my husband is like. He's very liberal in his conversational topics and very in tune with what he thinks his girls need to learn. And he will just cross that boundary very happily. And actually, all three of us, the girls in the family, are all wincing at, oh my God, he's going there again. So it's definitely good to ask or certainly think about and consider other people's boundaries from many different aspects.
We did touch on this a second ago, Lisa, in terms of what stops people setting boundaries, but let's just cover that off. What is it that really gets in the way? Why wouldn't people just let people know? What is it gets in the way?
Well, I mean, there's several reasons. One of them is the fear of doing it, the fear of being vulnerable, with somebody else, the fear of being judged for that vulnerability, the fear of letting someone down, the fear of not being perceived as on it, as maybe you think the other person thought you were. I think the thing to realise, though, and to recognise is, though, that there's a reverberation either way. So if you don't communicate a boundary, there's an impact on you and how you're feeling and on your relationship. If you do set a boundary, yes, someone might be a little bit surprised, but over time, and it might feel uncomfortable, but over time it gets easier and it will be better for that relationship because you just won't have that gradual chipping away at respect. Respect for yourself and respect for the other person in terms of how they're treating you.
It is really, really difficult because you don't want to offend anybody, you don't want to upset anybody, or constantly looking for approval, acceptance. It is hard. I don't want to underestimate for anyone listening to this how hard this is to do this. But good friendships and good relationships are built on people being honest with each other.
Yeah.
And I think if you can get in the habit of doing that with people and they know you to do that and they will know that your intentions are good and honourable and actually you're trying to do it for the health of both of the people. I'd love to be able to promise you I will help you with that. I don't really think I've got the time or the capacity to do that right now, Lisa, but I'd love to be able to help you with it, at another time. And I don't want to make promises that I can't keep. If you just said something like that, then people would appreciate it.
And by setting boundaries yourself, you are inviting others to be able to do
the same.
That as well, and that is, good for everybody concerned.
I would just recommend that people start with, just start with your closer relationships. Those are, just start there. And then, with perhaps people you don't know so well, it can be harder because, maybe you're meeting them for the first couple of times. I can think immediately with the clients, a client asks, there was a situation recently where a client had asked for something to be done by Monday, not necessarily appreciating in the UK that was a bank holiday.
Yeah, I remember,
And it was putting all of us under a bit of pressure. And of course, we're wanting to give the client what they want. But I just wrote back to them and said, look, I don't know if you appreciate it's a bank holiday. We have an extended public holiday, shall I say, on the Monday. Would it be okay if we got this to you Tuesday? And instantly the answer was absolutely.
Yeah, they were totally delightful about it, weren't
absolutely. they? Absolutely. And then, but whereas we could have gone around, not confronting that and running around like lunatics trying to get things done, impinged on our weekend stress levels, etc. So it's just, the little moments like that is just to be a little bit braver, have a little bit more courage.
Yeah.
And if that person or that relationship, and they don't respect that, well,
you've got a decision to make.
I think you've got a decision to make. I think, and even it's with clients.
Yeah.
I do think that most clients, people full stop, are respectful. But how do they know to respect you if they don't know where the boundary is in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfair, isn't it, if you don't communicate boundaries to people because they're sort of,
trying to navigate a relationship with you with their eyes a little bit shut, and then getting bashed over the head for crossing a boundary they didn't know that was there.
Exactly. And remembering that they're simply trying to get things done in their own time frames. They don't know. So just be honest about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've explored so far what boundaries are in this context and what sometimes gets in the way of people setting boundaries, and also the benefit of actually putting some time and effort into this in terms of clarity, self-care, and your relationships. So let's move on now to how we can actually identify and communicate these boundaries clearly. I think the first thing is obviously getting clear yourself. If you're not clear on your own boundaries, then how can you expect others to be clear? And I think that starts with a bit of self-reflection. When a boundary is crossed, you get a feeling. You get, for me, it's a feeling of frustration, or there's some sort of physical reaction to a boundary being crossed. I had an example even last week, which, this sounds a little bit crazy, but it was my birthday last week. And I think that birthdays are the one time in a year that it's the opportunity to make that person, it's their day, to make them feel special. And in our house, we have a tradition of waking the person whose birthday it is up with pots and pans. Have I told you this?
No.
So I know it doesn't sound very special, but basically the other people in the household wake the person up by bashing the pots and pans and saying happy birthday. And so it was my birthday last Thursday.
Right.
First of all, one of my daughters wasn't even there.
Oh dear. Bad form.
Second of all, I woke up before everybody else. And third of all, my husband woke up 1 hour later. So for me, that was like a boundary being crossed, and they couldn't believe that I was sad because I didn't get pots and pans on my birthday.
And those moments don't come back. You can't rewind the clock, can you?
They wanted to bash them in the afternoon. It's just not the same thing.
No.
It's not the same thing. Anyway, they paid for it. But so maybe a silly example, but that is, an example. And it's being aware, isn't it, of those situations where you feel something, you feel like something's been crossed. So identifying what those are. And then, you do a fantastic exercise around values, and that obviously lends itself very heavily to an awareness around personal boundaries.
It's your non-negotiables around what you feel is really important to you. I'll give you an example here where there was this particular individual I was working with. He was quite a senior executive. It was an operation. It was in operations, and he was talking to me about how his family values. He got 4 boys. And they were the sort of ages between sort of 7 and 12 or something like that sort of range. And he described to me that he would go home at 5 p.m. Every evening. Now, for a person running operations, that was a bold move. And he said, look, when I took the job, I told them ahead of time that I have a really clear family commitment to my boys. They see me between the hours of 5 and 7. They're coming home from school, doing homework. There's a big family time, meal time, etc. And then, of course, I'll be available later on. I'll come back to work, I'll do email, I'll contact people. And he said, I've never had a problem with it because I'm very clear about it. I'm very clear about it before I even take the job. Yes, there will be the odd emergency, the odd exception, but 80% of the time, I'm gone at 5.
Yeah, I like that.
And I was really impressed by it. He was very honourable. He said, look, I will never get this time back. The number of people, and he's absolutely right about this, by the way, the number of people I hear who, when they're asked about their regrets in their life, was that they wish they'd spent more time with their kids, which I think is an easy thing to say retrospectively, but it's actually making those tough choices between your career and your family choices. I'm not saying that's for everybody, not everyone can do that, but somewhere in that area, you could set a boundary. It's a bit like saying, okay, I do something with my wife or with my family on a Thursday, and I need to leave the office by latest 6:30, right? And that is it. Everybody knows it. You've been very clear about it. It's like a big rock in the diary, people come to respect it. So they look at the diary and they go, oh, I need to book Martin at 6:30 on Thursday. Oh, no, they won't be able to do that. Really? No, he won't be able to do that. No, he's always gone at 6:30 on a Thursday. It just becomes the norm. And that's the power of being clear about what your boundaries are, articulating them, and how good it feels to you.
Yeah.
You're honouring the people you're going to spend the time with. You're honouring yourself. And actually, you're making it easy for other people to know that that is a boundary you've crossed. But otherwise, you're just not going to feel good about them.
That's why it's so important to spend focused time on identifying what these are, because you can't it's a lot easier to do it consciously than just get the feeling and not really know why you've got the feeling, and then try and put something in. It all, feels a little bit clumsy. If you can really reflect on some of those things and some of those non-negotiables and act congruently with them. It's no good saying I've got this commitment to my family every Thursday, but you say yes to, meetings every other Thursday. It's just going to sort of erase the importance of that boundary. You have to act in congruence with the things that you were setting out.
Another example, I was speaking to one of my clients in the US. I would say he's in his probably late 50s, early 60s. And he has a really strong commitment to exercise every morning for an hour and 15, which is highly commendable for anyone to do. And he's absolutely clear about it. He said, that is what I do. It's what I do. That is me. I do that every morning, 6 days a week. And he said, no matter what, I will make my decisions. Okay, I'll get up earlier if I need to, so I can make sure I do it. It's for him, again, it's a big rock. It's a value. He's honouring that value. He's feeling good about it. Everybody knows, this particular individual knows that he does that. They're not surprised when he's maybe not available until a certain time. People work around it.
Yeah. And I think the thing to recognise as well is that nobody else is going to set them for you.
Well, the point is they won't set them for you, but they will use your time for you.
Yeah, as we said earlier, you are teaching people how to treat you. So they're not going to respect a boundary they can't, they're not aware of.
There's another example. I remember working with this one particular manager, and the subject was about allocation of time and managing time. And this particular manager was getting quite frustrated with some of his direct employees, some of his direct reports, not managing their time effectively. I ran the session with the team, and I discovered that there were two individuals that were effectively running their diary really well. And the others were saying, well, this manager set this session up. The problem with him is that he imposes lots of work on me at short notice. But there was two individuals there that said, well, I don't have that problem. So I later investigated it with the manager and said, I get this feedback. And I said, look, I think a lot of seems to be the issue is that you are part of the issue here. In fact, you're giving people work very late. I said, but there was two individuals in the group who don't seem to have that problem. And he immediately said, yes, well, I know who they are. Those are the two people that when I ask them to do something, they say, what do you want me to give up? And I have such a hard time getting them to do it.
You go through the path of least resistance.
Well, that's right. And he admitted it. He said, wrongly or rightly, I do think let's sometimes leave things to the last minute. I go to the easiest path. So I said, well, obviously that was a coaching conversation I had to have with him. And I said, well, you're not helping here. But it really struck with me that these two individuals felt they owned their diary in a professional capacity. And when their leader came to them, constantly coming to them saying, wanted them to do reports, get information together, data for a meeting. Love to help you with that. I don't know what you want me to stop doing so I can do it. But I'm not able to do it. And they would do it, but it was such a hard time that he stopped going to them. So because they had clear boundaries.
And that is, how you express that they communicated it, whether they did communicate it like that or not. But that is really clear. And, it's probably a good time for us to move on to how you actually communicate boundaries. And using I statements is really at the sort of cornerstone of it. Okay. So in an example where there is maybe a high level of workload, saying, I would love to be able to help you with that. I'm currently got a lot on my plate. Can I help you to distribute the work maybe slightly differently, or can we think about and talk about how we can organise our time so that we can get everything done in an appropriate time scale.
So it's expressing how you feel, being really clear about it, and making sure you're owning it, putting the I there.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're not saying you have made me stressed or you are giving, it's not like accusational. It's just calmly, kindly, and with emotional intelligence expressing a boundary and having an adult conversation, with another person. It doesn't have to be and should never be in any way aggressive. If you do feel triggered by something, then I would strongly suggest creating a bit of space between the event and actually having that conversation. You need to be calm and respectful of each other.
And the next thing, if you're going to do that, be direct, be specific. Don't fudge it. Because if you sort of say, maybe, I should be able to help you. Well, I might be a bit tight. I'm not quite sure. I'll do my best. That's a complete fudge. If you know the answer is no, then say no. Or at least explain to them why it's going to be impossible for you to do that. I'm going to find it incredibly difficult for me to do that by Friday. Can we agree that I'll have it to you by Monday afternoon?
And, 9 times out of 10, when you can set and agree expectations and deadlines with somebody else, they'll be totally, respectful and happy of that and will respect the fact that you've gone to them to have that conversation. I think the other thing, and this is one thing that it was many years ago, and I was having to have a conversation with somebody about a particular boundary, and you said to me, you've got to say this with every fibre of, you've got to be congruent with every fibre of your body. So you can't, you've got to be confident and assertive, which wasn't my nature, maybe more so now, but definitely less so then. You've got to get this message across, and it needs to come across in your body language and absolutely everything. So that's sort of another way of being absolutely clear about the message that you're communicating.
I remember that conversation. Yes, I do.
It has stuck with me. Probably to your detriment now.
Works well for us, Lisa.
Yes,
works well
absolutely.
for us. I think we have good communication between us. Setting consequences. What do we mean by that?
So I think that, in the example we used about somebody that has a lot of work and they've communicated with their boss that they have an issue with the workload and are willing to discuss how that can be evenly distributed. If that workload continues to pile up, then there needs to be a consequence associated with that. So can we find a way where we can distribute the workload more evenly? Because if not, I'm just going to have to keep coming back to you again and again, and we're going to be having this conversation. And, we're not going to be able to deliver the quality of work that we all want.
So you're letting the other person know in the moment the consequences of saying yes to them.
Or the boundary being continued to be crossed.
Right, that's a tough gig. I mean, that's going to take a bit of courage, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's basically saying, if you keep doing this, this is what's going to happen in the nicest possible way. Is what you're really saying.
Yeah, in a nice and respectful
way.
Because, if somebody's going, whatever, get on with it.
Yeah.
It's just going to get worse and worse. So, the consequence needs to be there. And, if somebody is in a situation where they're just not coping with the workload, then it is going to have an impact on the quality of work and all of the knock-on effects associated with that as well, not to mention the mental and physical impact on the individual.
Well, this is a case in point. A client I was coaching recently, and he was describing to me how he basically hit the wall. I mean, he got grounded. He just, physically, he just couldn't get out of bed.
Yeah.
On the outside, you would never know this. He was such a cheerful, happy individual, and he wouldn't allow himself to ever let anyone down. So he would take on more and more and more work. He had 3 boys. He was describing to me as well. They were consuming, and he was wanting to spend a lot of time with them. And he was just trying to please everybody all of the time. And unfortunately, it made him very ill. And it took him a good 6 months to recover.
Yeah.
It was quite a shock to me.
Yeah.
As I literally saw him from being this, super happy, inspirational individual to becoming a shadow of himself.
Yeah.
And he had to really dig deep, He got some counselling and therapy, and he had to own up to the fact that, he was just spending too long not explaining the consequences, absorbing all this work, feeling like that was his duty to do that, to make sure that he delivered results. And of course, yes, he delivered results in the short term, like Goose and the Golden Egg, that fable. Eventually, it will cost you.
Yeah, I'm just pleased that he got help. I'm sad that it got to that consequence. I mean, the definition of stress, as we know, is too much to do and too little time. There is only so much you can do.
But self-imposed quite often.
Yeah, because of the invisible rules that we think we have to be seen to do this, and the comparison with what you think other people are capable of doing. So you should be capable of doing. But there is no right or wrong here. This is a very personal thing that you need to take time to assess for yourself, and then be clear in actually communicating that.
This really does have a serious health consequence to it.
Yep.
Over time, repeatedly doing something which is not healthy for you, not healthy for your lifestyle, it will cost you eventually.
Yep.
And it never happens suddenly. It happens gradually. And it's a cumulative thing.
Yeah.
We've talked many times about this in the past. What you do every day has an impact in the long term. So make healthy decisions, tougher decisions potentially, but will give you a much healthier relationship with yourself and others longer term.
Yeah. And I think that, the final point on this is the importance of maintaining that consistency and being congruent. If you've identified something that is a rule, it is easier for people to respect that rule if you are consistent and congruent with that.
It's back to the same thing. You're letting others know how to treat you, is what you said earlier.
Yeah. And also opening the conversation up with other people about their boundaries and recognizing that, if you sort of feel, because you probably will get a feeling if you've crossed the boundary of another person because of their body language or the way they've reacted, or it could be that they've gone quiet or they've got angry. It's good to open up this conversation. It's absolutely a two-way conversation. You have your boundaries, they have theirs. Find out what they are.
And we're not necessarily advocating you use the word boundary.
No.
By the way.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. No, we're not.
That's an
please
important
tell me
point.
that might actually play.
Right, we are going to have a meeting about
boundaries. Yeah, what are your boundaries here? Yeah, it's just picking up on them, isn't it? It's just noticing them. I would hope for anyone listening to this that over the next week, just notice when your boundaries are feeling violated. And then ask yourself the question, what have I done to let that person or those group of individuals know that is actually crossing my boundary? What have I really done about it?
That is a brilliant and very practical thing that people can do.
And then start to think about, well, what would I need to say? What could I say? And how would I say that? And be brave, have the courage to go and have that conversation. And I think that people will respect it.
Yeah.
They're probably thinking to themselves, wow, I wish I had the bravery to say that to somebody.
And just notice the positive impact on your relationships. There's no hidden agendas, there's no hidden rules, it's open. Everyone knows how everybody, wants to be treated and respected, and you can do that more freely and openly.
It's such a weight off your shoulders.
Yeah.
When you've told someone about something and you realise actually they're okay with it, you feel, oh wow, I was really worried about that, but no, that's gone down very well.
Yeah.
They know what it is. And then what you'll notice is that people will, if they do need to break your boundary or they're asking you to, they will say that to you first.
Yes.
I know that, Thursdays are important to you, or I know that.
And actually you are really good at that. You always, I work Monday to Wednesday. We're a small company, so that has to be flexible. And that's the important thing as well. Boundaries are, need to be flexible sometimes, but you were always very respectful of my time.
Because you
so thank you.
Well, you make it very clear, not in an aggressive way. No.
Pick up the phone, put it down again.
I think that's an important thing. It's a two-way thing. That's what we're trying to say here. Unless you let people know, they don't know. Once they do know, it's up to you to then respect it.
Yep.
And they will reciprocate.
Absolutely.
And it works very well. Like, you know, we know in our own business that we're very respectful of each other on vacations. We want people to take a vacation. That is the point of it.
Yeah.
And if they're on vacation having to worry about doing work, what's the point in... That's not a proper vacation. You know, we like to do vacations professionally, do them well. In fact, I know we haven't mentioned that, but vacations is a great example. I go on vacation and then people are breaking your boundaries and sending you emails and, I know you're on holiday, but and you keep doing that. That's not... No, manage it. Know that they're away. Manage it.
Yeah.
And if you answer emails as frequently as you do on a work day, I'm afraid you've got your own self to blame.
You're teaching people how to treat you
Again, it's the same
badly.
thing. You know, we could go on and on and on, and hopefully people are getting this. But you can't continue to complain about problems that you are indeed yourself behaving yourself into. You have to look inside yourself and say, what is it about me? What do I need to overcome within myself to have the courage to be able to communicate to other people?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, whether this is personal, with your relationships, with your loved ones, with your partner, with your, you know, with your kids, relatives, professional relationships, they're all the same.
Yeah.
So be honest, be open, be clear, and you'll be doing everybody a favour.
The things that we've discussed on this podcast in terms of the process and the tips in understanding and setting boundaries, we will put in the Power Tool as usual. We'd love to hear anyone's thoughts and experiences as you really reflect on some of those situations that might give rise to those feelings and how you get on in setting your boundaries. It will have a positive impact on you and on your relationships with other people.
And each time you communicate a boundary to somebody, give yourself a little credit.
Absolutely.
Just give yourself a little note in your journal.
Yeah.
I did something today I wouldn't normally have done. And just make sure you hit that reward button for yourself, because it is not saying it's easy, but if you do it and you do it consistently, it'll become easier and easier and easier. And that leads to the purpose of these podcasts, to live a healthier, happier, more fulfilled life.
Yeah,
aligned
absolutely.
to your values and your passion. That's our goal here.
Absolutely. So
next time...
Next time, we are very excited because next time we have got a real-life stand-up comedian coming to the podcast. So Toby Caldwell will be joining us, and he is going to be talking about how to survive something that I would think would be absolutely terrifying.
Now that is
being a stand-up comedian. I mean, talk about exposing yourself.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, he's going to share some of his tips and tricks, and obviously all of those things can be applied to standing in front of an audience, whoever that may be, and overcoming fears, whatever they may be. So yeah, absolutely.
Until next time.
Thank you very much.
Take care.